100 years of indulgence and isolation. The boiling point of humanity, from sweat to silicon. If you are reading these lines on a rushed Monday morning, amidst incessant notifications and an exhaustive to-do list, please take a moment to pause your shallow breaths. Step behind the shadow of Mech, a human avatar representing the collective destiny of our global population. Let us journey back to witness the scent of sweat, the constriction of structural forces, and the struggle to reclaim power across different eras. Let us taste the bitterness and paradoxes of each age, and most importantly, ask, where does Mech stand today as our fellow traveler? We must first understand that world evolution is akin to boiling water. During the initial stages of the past few centuries, the changes might not have seemed obvious. The water in the pot remained still, even as it began to absorb heat incrementally. Layers of history were laid down, from the agricultural revolution to the foundation of land ownership systems and the expansion of maritime free trade. All of these were massive energy injections into the great pot until, only in the last few decades, the water began to boil violently and erupt. In reality, this is the culmination of centuries of progress. The transitions that seem to happen overnight in our era are actually propelled by the immense momentum of a history that has been brewing toward this boiling point. Humans today are the generation facing the scalding steam directly. However, there is no golden age for everyone. Every time the world appears to progress, it reshuffles the deck. Increased benefits are almost always exchanged for the displacement of people. This means there are always those who smile and those who shed tears. We are not here to compare which era was superior, but to ask, who is the world embracing and who is it leaving behind? A century ago, the equality of scarcity. Go back over 100 years. Mech's Monday morning is a dull gray and silent, beginning amidst church bells or calls to prayer in an agrarian village, be it in Europe, America, or Asia. His surroundings are a darkness dispelled only by the dim flicker of a kerosene lamp. His morning routine isn't checking a bank balance. It is a struggle in a world of staggeringly low productivity. Statistics before 1900 show that over 85 to 90% of the world lived in extreme poverty, with an average life expectancy of only 30 to 40 years. This morning, Mech must load his remaining harvest, after taxes, onto a cart to traverse rugged borders. Trade then was a test of heart through the barter system, for currency had not yet reached the masses. In his daily life, Mech must take the rice or tubers grown with his own physical labor to exchange for basic necessities like salt for food preservation, raw cloth for clothing, or kerosene for a few hours of light at night. These exchanges weren't just numbers. They were the price of survival. If a drought ruined the harvest, Mech didn't just become poorer in an abstract sense. It meant choosing whether his home would be dark tonight, whether his children would be cold because cloth was traded for food, or whether he would starve next year because he had to eat the seeds meant for planting. Every transaction was a literal sacrifice of life to survive another day. Who were the winners? Those who owned land and basic resources, water, seeds, tools. Self-sufficient communities might not have been wealthy, but they were more stable because the world moved slowly, and power was tied to the ground beneath one's feet. The losers were the landless laborers, those born out of season, or the sick. This era was cruel in a face-to-face manner. Hunger was hunger, illness was death. There was no safety net. This cruelty didn't stem from evil people, but from a world that simply hadn't produced enough to share. Medically, Mech lived with total uncertainty. Death was a neighbor, arriving through a small wound or unclean water. Diseases easily treated today were death sentences then. Yet, in this harshness, Mech had something our generation has lost: roots. He might never have traveled more than 20 kilometers from his village in his entire life, but he knew every stone and every tree. He knew he belonged here. Community bonds were ironclad because everyone relied on one another to survive. Inequality within the village was low because almost everyone faced the same fate under the power of the weather. Mech stood at the threshold of one of the greatest transitions in human history. The world was shifting from an economy dependent on nature and human muscle toward a production system driven by machines. The first industrial revolution, steam, and the second, electricity and mass production. The landscape changed slowly, but profoundly. Fields were punctuated by factories. Industrial cities expanded, sucking labor from the countryside. During this time, 80% of the world still worked in agriculture, and illiteracy exceeded 70%, leaving most without the educational tools to choose a new path. Mech and his contemporaries weren't forced to change, but were pulled into a new structure by the gravity of necessity. Life remained a negotiation with the elements and physical strength. The industrial age, the world selects the adaptable. When machines became the heart of production, the world didn't just produce more, it redesigned the playing field without prior notice. Events like the enclosure movement in 18th century England were pivotal. Common lands were fenced off and turned into private property for commercial production. Many farmers didn't lose because they weren't hardworking, but because they were severed from basic resources by law. Consequently, surplus labor flooded into industrial cities like Manchester, Birmingham, or Glasgow. Within a century, England's urban population soared from under 20% to over 60%. This wasn't entirely voluntary migration, it was migration for survival. In the cities, factories no longer required the unique craft of the traditional artisan. They demanded labor that was repetitive, punctual, obedient, and attuned to the rhythm of the machine. The Luddite movement, 1811 to 1816, where weavers destroyed machinery, didn't reflect a hatred of technology as often told, but the reality that skills honed over a lifetime were rendered worthless in a single generation. The wages of some skilled craftsmen dropped by more than half, while factory goods became 50 to 80% cheaper for consumers. The world gained as a whole, but many were dropped from the game, with no other options. The winner was not always the most hardworking, but the one with starting capital, access to machines, or the willingness to adapt to a new discipline, waking to the factory whistle, working 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, trading independence for a steady wage. Meanwhile, small farmers and independent laborers vanished. Agricultural labor in Europe and America plummeted from 70% to under 40% in mere decades. This was the moment the world signaled clearly: hard work alone is no longer enough if it doesn't align with the new mode of production. The industrial age wasn't the era where the hardworking lost, but where the world began rewarding only the type of hard work the system required. Medically, the industrial age didn't make humans safer, in the way we often imagine. Rather, risks were redistributed by class and geography. Rapidly growing industrial cities became breeding grounds for disease. Statistics from the mid-19th century show mortality rates for urban laborers were significantly higher than in the countryside. The average life expectancy for a laborer in Manchester in the 1840s was around 30 to 35 years, 10 years lower than in rural England. Working in damp, soot-filled conditions led to tuberculosis and machinery accidents becoming the norm. Illness was no longer just a personal health issue. It was a cost the system was ready to discard because labor was easily replaced by the endless stream of people from the countryside. Real medical progress reached people unequally. Germ theory, anesthesia, and urban sanitation drastically reduced mortality in the long run, but during the transition, access to health was a privilege of the middle class and capitalists. Early hospitals weren't places of healing for the poor, but waste management facilities for laborers too broken to work. Those who could still work were sent back to the assembly line. Those who couldn't were quietly excluded. The survival of a human began to be systematically tied to economic status, no different from wages or working hours. The present-day globalization, wealth, and the invisible cage. Cut to a Monday morning in the present. The tempo of Mech's life is compressed to a speed humans have never faced before. The city wakes to a single signal, a phone notification, not a bell or a whistle. Mech stands at the peak of the third industrial revolution, computing being overtaken by the fourth, digital platforms and AI. In less than 40 years, the world has created more data than in all of previous history combined. The internet has dropped communication costs to near zero. Consumption costs have plummeted relative to average income. Global extreme hunger dropped from 35% in 1990 to under 10% before the pandemic. This is a world sated with material goods in a way his ancestors couldn't fathom. In this world, Mech is a global citizen. Borders are thinned by fiber optic cables. Mech can learn from top universities without traveling, work for a company across the ocean without ever meeting his boss, and order products from thousands of miles away to his doorstep. Travel that took weeks now takes hours. Information and capital cross borders faster than labor can react. Yet, in this borderless world, a new, invisible cage has been built. Mech can theoretically go anywhere, but in practice, he is tethered to algorithms, platforms, and rating scores he never designed. The global labor market is open, but competition is exponential. Mech is no longer competing with his neighbor, he is competing with the world. Meanwhile, rewards are heavily concentrated. Reports show the top 1% own more wealth than the rest of the system combined. Many workers in the global economy have no more security than those in the old factories. Globalization hasn't imprisoned Mech with walls, but with the necessity to be always on to avoid falling behind. This world isn't a locked cell, it's a treadmill that cannot stop. Medicine, longer life, longer burden. One of the clearest changes in 100 years is the leap in longevity, from 30 to 40 years to over 72 years globally. This is a triumph of vaccines, antibiotics, and sanitation. However, socially, a longer life means a longer time in the system. Humans must work longer and plan for a much longer horizon of risk. Health costs have doubled as a percentage of global GDP. Mech in the past feared he wouldn't survive until next year. Mech today fears surviving for decades in a world where everything has a price. Anxiety has shifted from "will I live?" to "how will I live without economic collapse?" Modern medicine has extended life in a field where the rules aren't yet ready to support it. True power. The reason we need true power is not to oppress others, but to protect our own decisions. In a world where data and behavior are led by computers, the lack of agency is why we talk about true power today. It arises not from a lack of comfort, but because we are so comfortable that we are dependent on massive structures we don't control. The paradox is that Mech lives in a world where extreme hunger is nearly gone, yet the cost of failure is higher than ever. Student debt, the rapid obsolescence of skills due to AI, and the high cost of living mean the system has no room for error. Reclaiming power is not about rejecting progress, but about creating a buffer so that life can pause or change without being deleted from the system. If we lack power over our basic needs, we become batteries, used until drained, with no right to ask where we are going. For those who love their work, this might seem cynical, but this isn't an attack on hard work, it's about the lack of choice. The system runs by making compliance the only safe option. Humans answer emails at midnight because it's the only way to survive in an expensive world. When companies say, "we are family," but cut names from a spreadsheet to boost stock prices, we see the reality. 80% of workers globally are burnout, a sign that we live longer, but have the least power to say no in history. The future changing the rules of defeat. But on a Monday morning in the future, Mech begins to reclaim power through free access to essential services, travel, healing, and intelligence. These aren't meant to make everyone win or make people lazy. They're there so humans can lose without being disqualified from life. If someone fails in their career, they are still treated, they still have a place to learn, and they have the strength to start over. A smart society is one that doesn't lose its people too fast just because they failed once. This turns hard work into pride rather than coercion. In the future, Mech chooses work he co-owns. He is a global citizen with roots, a co-owner of resources. This freedom has a price, responsibility, and risk, but it is a price he pays willingly because this progress recognizes the human heart. Every era has winners and losers. The difference is how many times the rules allow us to fall before we are discarded. Finally, Mech becomes a human with power over his own breath, his healing, and his time. Machines work to serve life, not to crush it. If you were to put down your phone now, the question isn't whether you love your job. In a world of rising costs, love is rarely the primary economic condition. The more important question is, if one day you can no longer or no longer wish to play by these rules, how much space does this world give you to retreat, rest, or start anew without your life collapsing? Evolution, like boiling water, never asked for anyone's opinion. It boils from the accumulated pressure of history and technology. The only thing humans can negotiate is not the stopping of the pot, but determining who should be protected first as the world heats up and how defeat can be handled with dignity. If progress is to mean anything, it shouldn't just be about surviving longer. It must be about a world that refuses to judge a person's value before they've even had the chance to choose their own path.